For this lesson, we are going to talk about arrays. Arrays help us to store large amounts of data using just a single variable. So now if you need to store, let's say, 10,000 songs for a library, or you want to hold on to baseball statistics for an entire season, you can do it all with arrays and save yourself from writing dozens, even thousands or tens of thousands of variable names, and you can use just a few. All right, let's get into how we use arrays. So arrays have a few special properties. Arrays are a special type of object. So these are an object. And they can store other objects. But they can only store one type at a time. Can only store one type. So they can only store one type, but these can be any type. And the types can be primitive, not primitive, or objects. It can even hold other arrays. We'll get into that in another lesson. So it can only store one type of data, and once it's created, its size is fixed. Once it's created. We do have some flexibility about where and when we create it, but once it's created, its size is fixed. So these are some key things about arrays. Let's talk about how we actually code them. So let's say I want to make an integer array. I declare it like this. So I have an int, and then I use square brackets. This is our new piece of syntax. And then I put the name. So I'm going to go ahead and put ray. Int ray. So this is my declaration. Remember, declaration can be its own thing. So I could put semicolon after here and just declare it and give it and initialize it later. But let's go ahead and initialize it now. And we're going to initialize it like any other object with the new keyword. And then we're going to go ahead and say new int. And we're going to put our brackets again. But now we're going to add something. We're going to add an integer value in between the brackets. And let's go ahead and say our integer value is 5. Now, this integer value is always an integer value no matter what type you're storing in your array, because this integer value is the size of the array. The size of the array. You can say size or length, or we could even say capacity. It's how much data it can hold. How many individual integers can this one hold? 5. If I was storing doubles, I could put 5 in there. It'd still have to be an integer value in here. And I could store 5, or I could store 5 strings, whatever it is. So this is declaration. This side, of course, is instantiation. Instantiation. This is instantiation on this side. Okay, so I have my new array. And just as a quick side note, this is also perfectly legal to sit here. So that's a legal declaration as well. I prefer it sitting on this side of the integer, or on this side of the variable name, rather, on the right-hand side. Sorry, that's the left-hand side, because it's more clear that it's an array of integers, not an array of rays. So this is my array. Now, maybe I want to fill ray with data instead of this. So let's try a new version, and let's go with a new one. Let's say integer. Let's do a different type. Let's do double, and let's call our double array. We'll call it Raymond, just to be cheeky, and we'll say Raymond is filled with data now. So if I want to initialize with data, instead of just using 5 and creating space, I'm going to use curly braces. So curly braces, I can now specify exactly what's in each position. So let's do 3.6 and 2.1 and 5.2 and 3.9 and 10.0. And of course a semicolon. So now I have my doubles in here. And this initializes with data. So this is initializing with data. So now I have data in there. Now your next question is, okay, so you're initializing with data here, but what happens in the first one when you don't initialize with data? Well, this fills it with default values. Which, if you remember, all of our default values are for integers, for ints, that's 0, for doubles, that's 0.0, and for objects, it's null. Almost looks like a weird happy face right there with the null and the 0.0. It's pretty funny. Okay. So now I have Raymond. I have some data in here for Raymond. Let's say I want to manipulate some of the data in Ray or Raymond. Well, let's stick with Ray because integers are a little bit easier to work with. A little bit easier to write, really, because I'm lazy. So Ray works much like we work with strings. When we want to get something in a specific place in Ray, we're going to use indexes. So Ray has indexes. And the way that we've initialized Ray right now, let's do this a little different. Ray, a little bigger. There we go. So Ray has 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 places, right? But we index just like a string with starting at 0 up to 4. And we initialized it with zeros in each position. Okay, so now I have data in each of these spots. How do I access, use, change, manipulate these zeros? Well, I use those braces or the brackets that we had earlier. So I can say, let's ask the question here, how do we change this number? So let's say I want to change this at index 1. I want to change that value. How would I do that? Well, I would use my brackets, not braces, brackets here, and I would write Ray at bracket 1, and I would give that Ray at bracket 1 a value. Let's go ahead and say a value of 23. So Ray has a value now of 23. And let's say that I want to put a value of 10 at index 3. So again, Ray at index 3 gets the value of 10. And in our model of what's going on here, this becomes 10. Now, what if I want to get the data out? Well, all I have to do is flip this. So maybe I want to save that data into another variable that I'll use later. So I'll create a new integer variable of the same data type that Ray is. That's important, that this is going to save the same data type as Ray. And I'm going to call this, let's call this int 10. So I want to get the number 10 back out. And I'm going to say int 10 equals Ray at index 3. And this becomes the integer 10 because that is the value currently being stored at index 3, right? So this points to the index 3. It says, hey, go get what the value at index 3 is. It says, hey, there's an integer there. I'm going to return an integer back here, and then we're going to save that into the variable 10. That is the basics of how arrays work. We're going to get into more complicated things that we can do once we start looping through, searching for, and manipulating big arrays. All right, I'll see you guys in the next one.